Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. Let's get all the details from Stacey Herbert.
Max, Europe declares war on ratings agencies. A chorus of policymakers from Europe and across the world have denounced Moody's drastic downgrade of Portuguese debt as an act of financial vandalism, accusing the Anglo-Saxon rating agencies of driving states into bankruptcy and destabilizing the global system.
Yeah, that's right. They call it financial vandalism. See, they're upping the rhetoric. And we've been talking about financial terrorism for months and months and months now. They're upping the rhetoric. They're going to get to the point now where they realize that this is, in fact, not vandalism, which is a quaint way of saying terrorism. They didn't accuse Osama bin Laden of vandalism on 9/11 or whomever did that. It was an act of terrorism. Moody's, S&P, and Fitch are financial terrorists, and they are purposefully targeting these countries for destruction because they want their assets for nothing.
Well, Portugal's new premier, Pedro Passos Coelho, said Moody's downgrade was a punch in the stomach at a time when the new government has done everything demanded by the EU and IMF inspectors.
Well, it's part of a racket. Moody's is a publicly traded company. Warren Buffett's one of the biggest shareholders. They manipulate that stock price. They manipulate their ratings. They telegraph what their ratings are going to be before they make them so that insiders can profit from the inside information. Inside information is legal in Washington. They are lining their pockets. They're disenfranchising the people who live in these countries who are left with austerity measures imposed upon them for things that they never did and debts that they never incurred. And this is continuing unabated because nobody's stepping in to represent the interests of the people. The government, like Papandreou in Greece, is in the pocket of the terrorists. Papandreou, you are a terrorist. You are a financial terrorist. Do your country a favor and top yourself.
So Heiner Flossbeck, director of the UN Office for World Trade and Development, said the agencies should be dissolved before they can do any more damage, or at least banned from rating countries.
Or they should create their own rating agencies. Nothing stops Portugal from creating the Portuguese Bond Rating Agency and issuing a rating on American debt as D, technically in default. And therefore, it would shift all those hedge fund capital reserves into Portuguese debt and Greek debt and out of U.S. worthless debt.
But also the other thing we see here, Max, is that none of these rating agencies were held accountable for their crime wave leading up to the 2008 financial disaster. None of them saw jail time. None of them faced any criminal charges. And because of this, you see them able to hijack and hold hostage and terrorize nations around the world. They're able to continue doing this, just like Rupert Murdoch will continue to terrorize and all sorts of people throughout Britain because he's able to tap phones because he's friends with David Cameron, and who knows what his phone taps on David Cameron's phone have on David Cameron and why David Cameron is unable to act against Rupert Murdoch. So this is the same situation. All these oligarchs in this neo-feudal system are able to get away with fines or like little slaps on the wrist for doing anything wrong.
Right. Well, we have further proof that Moody's is committing acts of fraud and terror in that the Icelandic economy is bouncing back after they kicked out the bankers. And where's the upgrade?
Well, that's my next headline here, Max. Credit raters who didn't predict Iceland crisis miss rebound. So the credit agencies that failed to see the Icelandic economic collapse coming in 2008 are now refusing to recognize its resurrection. Of course, this shows that it's a racket because Iceland had a AAA rating up to 4 months before its collapse. Why? Because it was doing exactly what the banksters want. This is part of the racket. They were loading up the country with 14 times its GDP in debts. And now because they've kicked out all the banksters, they're never going to get their any sort of rating back. But in the real world, when Iceland held an auction recently, it was 2 times oversubscribed.
Great lesson for Greece. Greece says, oh my God, if we default on our debt, no one will buy our bonds again. That's false. Look at Iceland, 2 times oversubscribed for their latest tranche of debt. Default now, rebuild your economy, but keep your sovereignty. Keep your sovereignty. What's this guy Juncker saying? Oh, we don't think that the Greek people should have their own sovereignty. We think it should be South Germany. We want to run the entire European show. They do already. They've already been occupied by Germany once. You're going for twice now? What are you?
In this Icelandic regard, Valdemar Arman, an economist at Reykjavik-based asset manager Gamma, says, when you look at how successful that auction was, it's clear that investors are now crunching the numbers themselves and that the credit grades from the rating agencies are less relevant.
Well, that's because they are committing massive acts of fraud. And, you can't just say it's the Wall Street banks who are committing this massive fraud with impunity and it's entirely their fault. Because, after all, you want them to be aggressive in their attempt to make money. The blame falls on the regulators, which means the U.S. government in this case, or the UK government, and Barack Obama, or again, David Cameron. And this is where the two stories dovetail with Cameron, because in the case of Britain, not only are they lax with financial terrorism, but now he's lax with Murdoch, who is the dog poop of major media.
Yeah, but I maintain that we actually don't have governments, Max, that these regulators are not operating on behalf of the people, because they are actually are only a wing of those corporations who they're allegedly regulating. It's just a facade for the people. There is no such thing as government in our world today.
No, not in a kleptocracy. You can't rightfully refer to the people sitting in those offices as a government. No, you're right.
Of course, when Moody's downgraded Portugal by 4 notches to junk, spreads on Irish debt boomed. Irish begged to buy fridges to boost economy. So the yield on 10-year Irish bonds rose to a record amid increasing speculation that the nation's credit rating may join Greece and Portugal in being downgraded to junk. And the only thing that could rescue them, they're saying, is consumers. But the consumer savings rate is over 12%.
Look, this is a complete disconnect between what a sound economic policy should be and the benefits or harm it may impose upon the population. The people in Ireland should not be out incurring more debt to buy consumer non-durables and white goods like refrigerators and washing machines. They want to save money, and they want higher interest rates, and they want higher wages. So why is the government, or whoever, the kleptocratic class, encouraging that they go deeper into debt? Oh, let's see. Because it allows the policymakers to legitimize more quantitative easing, which keeps interest rates artificially low. That helps who? Oh, the speculators. The speculators and the rating agencies and the kleptocrats and the syndicates who are destroying the economy.
Well, Irish retail sales are falling at more than twice the pace of the average in the Euro region after the government increased taxes and reduced salaries for state workers by 14%. Now, the Irish economy is only 53% consumption, and the U.S. is 70%. So imagine what happens when these austerity measures are introduced to the U.S. Right now, we're in a death spiral in Greece, Ireland, and Portugal because of all the austerity measures. The economies are just spiraling into nothing.
Yeah, and what chumps these Irish are, because remember, when they were the first to go into the austerity butchering, they didn't revolt in any way. And then when Athens started to revolt in the street, the people in Ireland were very proud of themselves. Oh, we're not Greek.
Yeah. Well, they still are thinking that.
Yeah, we're not out there actually defending our interests.
And you see that there are no plans anywhere, whether Greece, Portugal, or Ireland, to develop a real economy at all. Irish Finance Minister Michael Noonan has pleaded with consumers to replace their clapped-out refrigerators and tumble dryers. So where are these tumble dryers and refrigerators made? Probably China or Germany. It's not going to help their economy at all. Consuming does not help their economy. Producing helps their economy.
The companies that the Irish government is encouraging to relocate to Ireland and in Dublin now are companies like Zynga that create virtual currency, which is a backdoor way into gambling. They just figured out a way to go around gambling laws. This is what the Irish government wants. They want horse racing, they want Zynga gambling, and they want to totally collapse. I get it. I know the government can do this. They can pass a law that allows people to cash in their Zynga dollars for Guinness. This way you keep them inebriated and broke. Good going.
So over in the U.S., a response to deficits has been an attack on workers as well. Union workers replaced with prison labor under Scott Walker's collective bargaining law. So state employees in Wisconsin make an average of $50,000 a year, and this includes all of the white-collar workers, all the executives working for the state. It includes their pension benefits and health insurance. So $50,000 a year. Now, a Wisconsin prison inmate costs $30,000 a year. So they're using free, Scott Walker's calling it free labor, for maintenance work, landscaping, and painting jobs. Yeah. So they're paying $30,000 for these prisoners to do the work.
That's right. This part of the global contraction and conflation in wages. In China, the wages are moving up. in the United States, they're aggressively moving down. And someone like Scott Walker, who is there in Madison, Wisconsin, he's an acolyte of the Koch brothers, who we know from recent revelations are in bed with the energy companies, they themselves being an energy company, to speed up the effects of the ecological holocaust that we're witnessing. And so his solution to the labor unrest is to put everybody in prison.
Well, Max, we were just talking about the casino element of the casino gulag economy. This reminds me of the gulag economies of like North Korea. You have a command and control gulag economy emerging in Wisconsin, using slave labor to perform your work. It never works. It doesn't work for North Korea. North Korea probably started out 40 years ago down this road on austerity measures. It probably started as a way to cut the deficit. Instead, they have a dilapidated economy that relies on the sugar daddy of China, because they can't invade. The only other way to pay for a gulag economy, as Germany did, was you invade other countries.
Yeah. Dear leader, Scott Walker.
But talking about powerful men, Britain's richest man to build giant Arctic iron ore mine. Britain's richest man, Lakshmi Mittal, is planning a giant new open cast mine 300 miles inside the Arctic Circle in a bid to extract a potential $23 billion worth of iron ore. The mega mine includes a 150-kilometer railway line and 2 new ports, and it's believed to be the largest mineral extraction operation in the Arctic, and it relies, of course, on melting sea ice.
It's sort of like an open casket mining operation because the Earth's ecosystem is dead. This frickin' guy knows it, and he's just he's what do you call the guy who rapes a dead person? A necrophiliac?
The point is that with the final headline here, melting ice caps open Arctic for white gold rush. Scott Walker, for example, he's using prison gulag. They're introducing a gulag economy, but he's also a climate change denier, for example. But there's a gold rush up into the Arctic. You have all of these firms. You have Britain's richest man, probably a man who finances some of these denying industries because they don't want any competition. So you have a whole gold rush, whole swathes of the Arctic across from Greenland, Canada, Finland. They're all opening up their mining rights. There are all sorts of small entrepreneurs going up there. They find no ice there, remarkably. A lot of the denying industry is actually telling people that there's growing ice. There's so much ice up there. We're entering a new ice age. And yet, the facts on the ground, the business on the ground, the people benefiting from this are actually, up there operating and making money.
So, yeah, the deniers are adamant that there's more ice building. At the same time, they're exploiting the fact that the ice is rapidly diminishing. All right, well, Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Okay, don't go away. Much more coming your way right after the break. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to go to New Mexico and talk with Guy McPherson, Professor Emeritus of Natural Resources and Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. His blog is Nature Bats Last. Welcome to the show, Guy McPherson.
Thanks, Max. It's great to be on with you.
Okay. Now, Guy, in 2011, it's looking to be the worst on ever for climate disasters, certainly worse than 2010. Now, the U.S. has seen the worst droughts in recorded history, the worst floods in U.S. recorded history, the most tornadoes in history, the biggest fire in Arizona state history. Is this all just a freaky coincidence, or is there something else at work here?
I strongly suspect there's something else at work here, that climate chaos is underway and is ratcheting up. I don't see any evidence that this is not driven by anthropogenic climate change and that it's not going to get a lot worse in the years ahead.
Okay, so you've taken this pessimistic view for the moment, but segue into my next question here. You started out as a climate scientist 25 years ago, but stopped researching 10 years ago as part of a transition. Tell us about it.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, I was editing a book on climate change. It was my most comprehensive assessment to that point. And it became clear to me then, just over a decade ago, that we had probably committed ourselves to extinction at our own hand. I mourned for 6 months to the curious amusement of the 3 people who noticed. And that's when I stopped doing primary research on climate change because I thought it was fairly hopeless. However, shortly thereafter, I discovered global peak oil and the likelihood of reduced energy supplies at the global level, bringing down the industrial economy and therefore forcing us to reduce emissions by 80% or so.
So peak oil, and how does it also impact markets as a whole?
Oil affects the market in a way far more significant than you would think based simply on the amount of oil in the ground. Each of the 6 worldwide economic recessions since 1972 have been preceded by a spike in the price of oil. And the more profound the spike, the deeper the economic recession. And I don't think we've worked out yet the spike from 2007, 2008 that led to what they call the Great Recession, which I call the Great Depression. I don't think we've worked all that out yet, and I foresee another spike on the way that could very well bring the whole system down in the United States.
Okay, now let's talk about the future of these oil markets. We know that the U.S. Department of Defense consumes roughly 400,000 barrels of oil a day, or something in the order of $230 million worth of barrels of oil every day. Will the time come when they simply declare force majeure and say we're no longer interested in price discovery and free markets, we're just going to take the oil?
Well, I think that's what we've been doing since the Carter Doctrine of the late 1970s. I think the last decent man in the Oval Office will be known by history for his statement that with respect to the Middle East, that's our oil over there. That's the Carter Doctrine. So I would argue we've been doing that for a generation or so now, and that we're involved in 6 wars from this country, primarily because those countries have the materials we think we need to survive. I don't see much change over the course of the last 30 years. We're just doing the same thing we've always been doing, which is occupying other countries for their materials.
Now, going forward from the Carter period through the great expansion we've had in GDP, which has come also with an even greater expansion in credit or debt, it seems as though the peak oil scenario has arrived at the same time as this peak debt or peak credit scenario, roughly at the same time, 2008-7 period. Now, going forward, since much of the trade is done in U.S. dollars, does the peak oil scenario and the peak credit coterminous scenario play out? Is this a net negative or positive for the U.S. dollar?
I think it's net negative. We see a few countries already abandoning the U.S. dollar, or at least trying to abandon the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency and starting to conduct transactions in other currencies. I refer to this relatively frequently as the Titanic of peak oil smashing into the iceberg of U.S. debt. You're right, the interaction between those two is a really big deal that is being ignored, marginalized, covered up by governments and the media around the world.
Now let's talk about an emerging hotspot in the Arctic area. The Arctic ice sheets are melting, and of course this is exposing more possibilities for development, but also reigniting geopolitical tensions. You've got people saber rattling now, trying to take control of these newly exposed areas. It's interesting because, of course, exploring and extracting and processing the energy will exacerbate the speed at which the climate in the Arctic is melting. So again, the short-term interests of a gallon of oil today seem to be trumping the long-term interest of survival of the species. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. We're at the level of society now, we're in flight or fight, aren't we? We seem to be going after the next dollar, the next barrel of oil, and the future be damned. And I don't know, half a dozen people who think that the future of their children depends more on climate change than it depends on ready access to cheap oil. And that's just incredibly short-sighted.
Now, speaking of big government, you've exited empire. Why and how?
Well, I was a professor and a very successful one. I had 9 books published in a 20-year career at the University of Arizona. I was at this Research One institution. I was well paid. So people wonder, why would you leave a gig like that? But at the most fundamental level, this came down to a question of morality for me. I view cities, and Tucson is the classic example, of a big city in the desert Southwest. Cities are the apex of empire. Tucson, Arizona extracts all of its water from well beyond the boundaries of the city. It extracts all of its food from well beyond the boundaries of the city. Essentially steals resources from other populations, from other cultures, and from the future just to survive. At some point, you do that long enough and you start to look under the covers, you pull back the screen, you realize that this is not really all it's cracked up to be in terms of what culture would have us believe. And so once you see that, you can't unsee it. So it became increasingly difficult over the last 5 years for me to talk about the costs and consequences of industrialization and continue to live there at the apex of empire. So I could no longer live in those two worlds. Finally, I just had to exit empire. I had to leave. So I'm trying this profound experiment with a couple of partners here on a property in New Mexico. We have 2.7 acres with a little bit of water right. We're trying to grow all of our own food, generate our water from rainwater harvesting and solar pumps and hand pumps, and maintain body temperature and establish good relations with our human community. Those are the big four for me for post-carbon living: water, food, body temperature, and human community. So we're going to give that a run, but also see if we can set an example for the economic collapse that is underway and is bound to be complete in the not too distant future, a way for people to survive and even thrive in the years ahead.
Now, I notice on the polls that are conducted asking people what is the most hated company in the world, usually at the top of the list is Monsanto. Monsanto, of course, has figured out a way to completely co-opt seeds. And by having the seeds blow around and doing the work for them, their seed currency, as I like to think of it, is infiltrating the seed stocks everywhere. So here you are in New Mexico. You're trying a community to be self-sufficient. You will at some point be relying on seeds. So how do you fight against that? Are you actively trying to fight against that? Would you agree that Monsanto is one of the most pernicious corporate players out there?
I absolutely agree that Monsanto is one tentacle of the evil monster that the industrial globalized society has become. Big ag controls our seeds and therefore our food. Big energy poisons our water. Big ag controls the messages we receive every day. Through it all, we think we're free, of course. But we don't have any control over so many of these factors. What we're trying to do in this valley, us and also many of our neighbors, is relying on heirloom seeds. So we purchase a bunch of heirloom seeds and we're going seed to seed with our garden vegetables. So we save the seeds from this year's tomatoes for next year's tomatoes. Will we be awash despite that in Monsanto seed, in GMO, in materials that we're not really very happy with? Certainly, no doubt. Just as we'll also be profoundly affected by global climate change, just as we'll be profoundly affected by economic collapse. But there are things that we don't have any control over. We're trying to control the things we do have control over, working within this community. And the other parts, you wish for the best, but there's not a lot we can do about some of those factors.
All right. Well, the increasingly as reports come in from people doing similar projects to yourself, getting off the grid or starting to be self-sustained in communities of their own, they seem to be coming under greater and greater attack from the federal government, who is, of course, doing the dirty work for companies like Monsanto. So you're in kind of the conflict there, therefore, with the feds. So is the hope that the feds will go bankrupt before they have enough juice to terminate you? I mean, is it kind of that's the bet you're making?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. No doubt about it. Benito Mussolini defined fascism as the merging of the state and the corporation. And I think we're there. I think we've been there for a while, but I think it's becoming broadly recognized at this point that we're there.
All right. Well, keep the light on for me in case Straggler in the Night arrives looking for safe shelter. That could be myself.
All right. Will do, Max.
All right, Guy McPherson, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max. I appreciate the opportunity.
All righty, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I want to thank my guest, Guy McPherson, his blog is Nature Bats Last. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.